Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, the Joe Miller Show, broadcasting on 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have with us Congressman Thomas Massie. He entered Congress in November 2012 after serving as a Lewis County Judge Executive. I was actually in Kentucky when he was running for that position. At that point in time, he was running against the establishment, and he's continuing to do so, making a stand against Boehner and that infamous vote that he was managed to get, I guess, a couple of dozen other of his colleagues to support him in that. He also attended, before Congress and before serving as the Lewis County Judge Executive, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. And electrical engineering was his field, master's degree in mechanical engineering. During school, I wasn't aware of this, invented a technology that enabled people to interact with computers using their sense of touch. And he leveraged that technology to found a corporation called SenseAble Technologies, raised over $32 million in venture capital, created 70 jobs, and obtained 24 patents. That hardware and software that he developed is now used to design automobiles, jewelry, shoes, dental prosthetics, even reconstructive implants for wounded soldiers. Currently he serves on 3 committees in the Congress: the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Congressman Massie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Joe.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I mean, you're one of the patriots in Congress that's fighting against the establishment that's been dragging us down for several decades. We talked to your colleague, Congressman Bridenstine, last week a little bit about this, but your perspective on the vote against the Speaker and whether or not there's been any retaliation against you since.
Well, there's definitely retaliation. You know, it's like there's bruises that show and bruises that don't show. There were 2 of our colleagues that were kicked off the Rules Committee, and Congressman Bridenstine and I predicted this before the Speaker vote, that there would be repercussions if you voted against the Speaker. Now, with Congressman Bridenstine, they've recently ran ads against him on this DHS vote back in his district. This is a super PAC that Boehner's ex-chief of staff helps to run. And so those are sort of the bruises that don't show. You can't link them to that vote directly. And then there's also something it's a little bit inside baseball, but there's a lot of money to be raised in Washington, D.C. from the political action committees,
right.
And they run in herds. And if the Speaker tells them, don't donate any money to this list of congressmen, then they don't. I mean, that funding just dries up. And so Congressman Bridenstine and I are on that list of congressmen that are not supposed to receive donations from groups, even if they agree with us.
Well, that means that you just have to reach out to all the patriots out across the United States that support folk like you. I can tell you that when you can only muster 25 votes and yet, something like 60% of Republicans are behind you, it seems like you've got a pretty good funding source there.
Well, and what I tell people is you don't need a whole lot of money to get reelected if you vote right. I think a lot of people, incumbents, need to raise a lot of money because they have to go back home and try to convince their constituents that they are something that their voting record would indicate otherwise.
Right.
And Congressman Bridenstine doesn't have that issue. I certainly don't have that issue. I'm on social media explaining my votes. I'll go to great lengths, and when people comment on there, I'll comment on their comments and interact with constituents, and in a way that everybody can see what my thought process is, why I voted, and what was actually in the bill that never gets reported in the media.
Well, let's talk a little bit about one of the actions that you've taken that, at least in establishment circles, is probably not all that popular, and even among some of the people may not be. In my circles, your concern is something that I hear all the time: Patriot Act, the surveillance state. We can talk a little bit about mass surveillance too, but you have apparently filed a bill to repeal the Patriot Act. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why?
Sure. This week, we decided to hit the master reset switch, and this is actually a bill that I co-sponsored with a Democrat, Mark Pocan, and what we pointed out is that when the Patriot Act passed, it was basically taking advantage of a real crisis, but it was the wrong solution, and a lot of people voted for it without reading the bill or considering the implications of it. And it basically rolled back a lot of our Fourth Amendment protections that protect our rights that our founding fathers fought very passionately for. And what we've decided with this bill is we need to not only repeal the Patriot Act and start all over, we need to put in new whistleblower protections. People say, what about Edward Snowden? Was he a hero? Was he a traitor? I tell them that is beside the point. This is an issue of national importance that's much more important than Edward Snowden. But if you want to prevent the fallout of having your national secrets in the media, and maybe more than you need, and then having somebody flee to a different country, there need to be whistleblower protections for somebody like an Edward Snowden. Do you realize he couldn't even have legally come to me? I'm a congressman, and I am privy to national secrets, but it would have been illegal for him to come to me and disclose to me what he knew. He would have had to go to somebody on the Select Intelligence Committee, and I'm willing to bet he would have gone straight to jail. The guy would have been locked up. He never would have seen the light of day if he had gone to somebody on the Select Intelligence Committee up here. So this bill that we've introduced repeals the Patriot Act. It has new whistleblower protections, and it also has an element in it that we passed in Congress. Again, a bipartisan vote, 293 to 123. We passed a limitation on an appropriations bill last summer that would keep the government from coercing companies that write encryption software or manufacture routers from putting secret backdoors in their products. Currently the government claims claims they have the authority, and so therefore they do force manufacturers to put weaknesses or backdoors in their products that the government can exploit. The problem with that is it makes you less safe because hackers can find those backdoors, of course, and also it hurts our exports of our products. Do you think somebody sitting in Germany wants to buy American software that says every month it pops up, says put in your root password, we're going to upgrade your software for you? They don't want to do that knowing that American software could be compromised. So this summer we passed a bill to keep the government from doing that. An amendment. That amendment was stripped out of the Cromnibus. It should have been in the Cromnibus, but they went behind closed doors, took it out of the Cromnibus, even though it passed with a veto-proof majority on the floor of the House. So we've stuck that back into our bill that repeals the Patriot Act. It provides that protection for companies and consumers.
So who was responsible for stripping that out in the Cromnibus?
It's going to be Republican and Democrat leadership. When the Senate, this would have been Harry Reid and Speaker Boehner got together behind closed doors and their staff and said, okay, even though some of these amendments passed, we think they're inconvenient. We're not going to put them in the final Cromnibus, and so they stripped it out. It's hard to prove who it was, but it's gone.
Yeah, there are a lot of the whistleblower protection that's being offered in the repeal in the legislation that you proposed. I mean, it's a no-brainer. You saw what Snowden did, first ending up in Hong Kong, under Chinese influence, and then over to Russia under Russian influence. They probably took their pound of flesh, or at least that's the speculation, in exchange for him having free passage. I mean, it's dangerous to talk motivations, but it certainly appears that Snowden was motivated out of these concerns for constitutional invasions that he saw going on. It's really a shame that he had to do what he did rather than having the ability to come here to expose basically the illegal acts and then obviously not be a security risk to the country. With respect to what you proposed, the legislation to repeal the act, the whistleblower protection, and then the reinsertion of the provision that keeps the government from getting or compelling these encryption keys, or I guess I should say the back door to the encryptions. What's the president's perspective on it? Has anybody had any contact with the administration to find out whether or not it would support or would tend to veto this?
When this president got elected, I disagreed with 95% of what he said he was for and agreed with 5% of what he was for. He talked a good game on civil liberties. That's the 5%. As it turns out, he doesn't care about the 5%.
Right.
He is worse on civil liberties than the Republicans that he replaced, certainly no better. He does not want this to happen. This is, the American people, this is like a 75-80% issue with the American people. They're on our side. And as the 293 to 123 vote this summer indicates, even the members of Congress, the House of Representatives, are on our side. Now, the only way we got that vote to happen in the House is it was an amendment that we offered in an open amendment process, and that's part of the rules of the House on appropriations bills. Anybody can submit an amendment. Otherwise, we get struck down in committee. This bill is going to get referred to the Judiciary Committee. and they're not going to give it the time of day there. So the president's going to block it, and our leadership will block it.
Congressman Massie, I'd like to hold you on one more segment to talk a little bit about the surveillance state, why all this matters. Can you give us another 10 minutes?
Sure,
Fantastic.
We'd love to, Joe.
Stay with us. Congressman Massie, one of the patriots fighting the establishment in the Congress, working for us, repeal the Patriot Act, getting some other good legislation through. We'll be back with you in a few. The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We're honored to have with us U.S. Representative Thomas Massie. He entered Congress in November 12 after serving as the Lewis County Judge Executive. That's when I met him when he was running for that office. At that point, running against the establishment, still doing the same, being a strong voice for liberty in the Congress, and most recently introduced a bill to repeal the Patriot Act. Has some wonderful provisions attached to it. We'll see where that goes. Congressman Massie, I don't know how much time that we have with you, but one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit, people hear about the Patriot Act, they hear about the surveillance state. They say, hey, that really doesn't affect me. So what? Government may be recording all my calls. I'm not doing anything illegal. This is really beyond my personal interest. I'm not going to engage. Why should that be important to every American?
You know, I've heard that argument. I've also heard people in Washington, D.C. say, well, your privacy is not violated unless you find out that your privacy was violated. And that's no lie. The previous chair of the Select Committee on Intelligence here in Congress said that during a hearing.
Wow.
And that's a dangerous thing. You know, if you've got a search warrant or probable cause and you're going after somebody for a crime, I don't have a problem with that, okay? I don't have a problem. You could get a roving wiretap if you want on somebody if you have reasonable suspicion and a judge has given you a search warrant. But that's the protection you need to have. Otherwise, here's what happens. They compile this huge haystack of information, and they can go sift through it for a needle. They can go sift through it for a bobby pin. They can find whatever they want. This is one of the problems with the intelligence and the information they're collecting. You know, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with the term metadata, where that's the program where the government is basically collecting all of the phone calls, the numbers that you've called, the data about them, including the number you called and the length of the call and where the call originated from. That can tell you about people's behaviors and who they associate with. But there's also this program, it's called PRISM, where they have collected not just the metadata, but the very content of your communications. Ostensibly, they're doing it if your communication crosses a boundary of the United States into a foreign country. But, you know, with the way the Internet is today in the cloud, your servers could be in Iceland or Canada. And so what you might not think is an international communication could be your everyday communication. So the government has the ability to collect all this information under the premise that you could be communicating with a foreign terrorist. Now, okay, I understand they're doing that. The problem comes when they start sifting through this database for things unrelated to terrorism. Maybe they go in to look about your taxes or some other thing, and they're going on fishing expeditions in these giant haystacks of information that were compiled, never supposed to have your data in it unless you were communicating with a foreign terrorist. But it's just too tempting for the government. And you may think you're in the right, but so many of our laws, there are hundreds of thousands of pages of U.S. code, they could probably find that everybody in this country has violated a law at some point in their life. And
there's a book out there called 3 Felonies Per Day, speculating that most Americans commit a felony each day. The problem is, I mean, nobody would ever imagine the Department of Justice being politicized, right?
Yeah, no, I can't imagine that. You know,
and if they've got the information there and they have a target, you know, what's going to stop them?
That is the problem, and we've seen targeting at the IRS. I serve on the Oversight Committee, as you said in the opening segment, and so I've been there twice with Lois Lerner when she was not more than 15 feet from me and raised her hand and took the Fifth Amendment. It's pretty clear that they were targeting conservative organizations, and so the problem is, there are no angels in the government. There are no saints here in Congress. There are no saints in the bureaucracy over there that works for the administration. And so it's just too tempting of a thing for these government officials to go in there and use it to exact revenge on people after elections or before elections. It's too much power to put in the hands of anybody. And just because you're elected or appointed or confirmed by the Senate doesn't mean that your morals and scruples are any more intact than the general public. So I wouldn't trust – I work with these people. I wouldn't trust them with your information.
And it's more power than what any past regimes have ever had. I mean, you compare the surveillance state today in America with, the Stasi in East Germany. And sure, they had informants. But you know what? We have electronic informants everywhere now. And, when you do virtually and increasingly every day, more and more of your activities, your communications, your to-do list, they are all reduced to an electronic format, of which, I think all that media is potentially subject to, review and storage by the federal government, given what we know about PRISM and, their collection, the admission about the collection of metadata and everything else. It's a pretty terrifying time to be in, and I think all patriots ought to be standing up against it. With respect to pushing back on that, I mean, obviously the repeal of the Patriot Act, you've got some positive stuff going in that legislation. Are there any steps afoot, though, to rein in the government in the realm of collecting this electronic data on its citizenry?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the private market is fighting back with encryption that even the government can't crack. And this is a fight right now that's going on between Silicon Valley companies like, I won't mention any companies, but there are companies that have encryption software now in their mobile devices that even the government can't crack. And the government wants to be able to force them to give them the keys. And that's what some of my legislation has been aimed at. And again, whether it's fighting back against the EPA, whether it's fighting against the FCC on net neutrality, or whether it's fighting against some of these Patriot Act things and the abuse of the FISA Act to violate your privacy, the real keys to the kingdom here, as far as Congress goes, is the power of the purse. And this is also the way that rank-and-file members can have an effect in Congress is through the power of the purse. If you think back to the last 2 years of Congress, we had Harry Reid in charge over there in the Senate, and we had Republicans in charge here in the House. Well, the House passed appropriations bills, and I offered 3 amendments, actually, that passed last summer. One of them defunded all of Washington, D.C.'s gun control laws, which I thought was a pretty good amendment. It passed on a voice vote, and then I objected, even though it was my own bill, and required a recorded vote because I wanted to see people go on record. And the Democrats let it pass on a voice vote because they didn't want to go on record.
Sure.
And when they did go on record, 20 of the Democrats voted for my amendment to basically defund all the Washington, D.C. gun control laws. And I would never be able to bring a bill like that to the floor, but in the appropriations process, I can offer amendments that do that. Now, we had a hard time resolving those with the Senate because the Senate never followed what's called regular order. They never passed any appropriations bills, and Harry Reid never let them have votes on amendments over there. But, the new Republican majority over there has promised a different process that they're going to follow regular order. I'm very hopeful that they follow the appropriations process, and I'm certain that some of those great senators like Mike Lee and Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, that they would offer amendments in that appropriations process that mirror the amendments that I want to offer to basically rein in the ATF, the EPA, the FCC, or the NSA. And what you'll find out is people, ultimately, when you can get a roll call vote, a recorded vote, that's a very powerful thing because congressmen have to go back in their town halls and explain their vote. And when you hold them to the light of day, you can get some of this stuff passed.
So you think it unlikely that the president will veto and face a shutdown? He'll actually allow an appropriation bill with some of these amendments to go through. I mean, it's going to be a trade-off for him, right? I mean, he'll have to weigh the impact.
Well, here's the trick. We can't allow this to be a CR or an omnibus bill, okay? What happened in 2013 when I was here for that was we were faced with shutting down the entire government over the funding of Obamacare. Well, it sounded pretty draconian because he just took the national parks hostage and said nobody's going to visit these, nobody's going to see the monuments, yada, yada, yada. And He tried to make it worse than it was.
Right.
But if you follow the appropriations process and you don't fund the government with one big omnibus, one big bill like has happened, you passed 12 different bills that funded 12 different parts of the government. And can you imagine if we took the EPA to task on trying to redefine the waters of the U.S., which they are trying to do right now, and they will accomplish if we don't fight back. If we said we're not going to pass that 1/12 of the government, that bill that funds the EPA, we're going to pass the other 11, put them on the president's desk, and we will pass the one that funds the EPA, but it's going to preclude them from redefining waters of the U.S. Put that on the president's desk. He doesn't get to say he's going to take the entire government hostage if he doesn't get his way with the EPA. What he's going to have to do is take the EPA hostage. And
right.
Because everything will be funded except for the EPA if he doesn't acknowledge that they're not going to redefine the waters of the U.S. to basically include everybody's property in every little ditch. That would be very powerful. I don't think Fox News and not even NPR would have a countdown to EPA shutdown because,
sure.
frankly, the people would probably like to see the EPA shut down. Most of them certainly wouldn't care to see it take a break for a few months. And that's what we should do. If we follow the regular order, pass 12 appropriations bills, so the president can't take the whole government hostage over his little pet issue.
Congressman Massie, I'm not sure how much more time you have. We'd like to talk a little bit about that DHS vote. We're coming up against a break, and also net neutrality, because it's something that a number of our listeners don't quite understand and how it may ultimately be used to limit them on freedom. But can you stay with us for a few minutes?
I'd love to, Joe.
Fantastic. Appreciate it. Congressman Massie, Patriot, standing up against the establishment in the Congress, moving to repeal the Patriot Act, has a number of additional provisions that are very positive for freedom, addressing issues that we have. Stay with us. More from him on the DHS vote, as well as net neutrality after these messages. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We have with us Congressman Thomas Massie, congressman from Kentucky since November 2012, actually elected then, sworn in January 2013. And I've known him since he was serving as the Lewis County Judge Executive. He's a solid conservative, liberty-oriented, introduced a bill to repeal the Patriot Act, has some other great provisions in it, too. Congressman, thank you for staying with us. Appreciate the extra few minutes you're giving us.
Thank you, Joe. I got to tell you, when you came to Kentucky a few years ago, that was a real honor for us to get to meet you. And at the time, I hadn't even planned on running for Congress, but I saw what you were doing, and that was inspiration to try and shake up the establishment. So kudos for what you did, and I'll let you know you were part of the inspiration that got me to run for Congress.
That's a real honor to hear that. I mean, there are a number of people that are out there that have been out there for a number of years trying to activate the people to what's going on. And, we're all pushing for what direction to go in. What do we do next to try to get this country back and to get, government dominance away and to take care of the surveillance state and the regulatory state? I mean, sometimes it seems like just an overwhelming task. And, you see allies like Senator Jim DeMint leaving the Senate, going into Heritage. Of course, he told us on our show last week, more impact, more effectiveness to the Heritage. But, there are a lot of folk that enter into politics that get demoralized quickly and believe that despite the fact that they've got the right beliefs and the right motivation, that their single voice is not effective. You were telling us during our break about a conversation you had with a colleague. Could you tell us a little bit about that and kind of what your perspective is on the future, whether or not you can really have the positive impact that you were elected to have?
Well, sure. When you jump into the swamp up here, and you usually don't realize what you're getting into until you get here, you're faced with a couple decisions, really. You can either drink the Kool-Aid, go along to get along, pretend like everything's okay and that the process is not broken and that you're up here fixing things. Or you can be transparent and you can, if you open your eyes and see what's going on here, you realize this place is completely broken. And you need to, when you go back to your town halls, you should tell the people how it really is. Now, for the person who's in this battle, for the person who comes up to the swamp to fight this, and I tell people, it's one thing to watch a 435-car pile up. That's my analogy for Congress. It's another thing to be in the car wreck. But for those of us who are in that 435-car pile up, who aren't drinking the Kool-Aid, who are facing long odds on many different issues, we get together sometimes and say, what are we doing here? In fact, 4 minutes before I came on your show, I had a freshman congressman here in my office, and we were talking about what are we doing here. So, part of maybe what we're doing here is we're fighting the battle until more good guys like you show up. And it is getting better. I will point this out. This is a fact I didn't know until I came to Congress. In 2010, there was a huge wave of new representatives. I think there were 94 or 95. And then in 2012, there were 84 new congressmen. Now, not all of those were Republicans, but there was a lot of shakeup. And there were a lot in 2014. Why I'm telling you this is, in less than 5 years, more than half of the House of Representatives has changed hands.
That's extraordinary.
That's a lot of turnover. The median term here in Congress in the House of Representatives is between 4 and 6 years. And that gives me hope, because the ones who have been here the shortest period of time are the least likely to, I call it, become zombies. And that analogy fits, because I don't know whether, once they become a zombie, I don't know whether to hit them with the baseball bat or to hug them, because they still look like the same person that came here. They just behave very different.
Congressman, we've got a couple of calls. Would you mind taking a question or two?
Sure.
Okay, we have on the air Charles. Charles, welcome to the Joe Miller Show. Do you have a question? Oh, lost that one. I think maybe they're calling back. While we're waiting for that call to reconnect, let's talk a little bit about the DHS vote. You mentioned to me, and this is, of course, the ill-fated vote that actually funded the amnesty bill that was had, I guess, 3 weeks ago. What exactly transpired? What did you do in that vote that was kind of unusual?
Well, there were a lot of unusual things that happened, but let me tell you how it happened and when it happened, because this has never been reported in the media. As soon as Netanyahu got done speaking, and it was a very powerful speech, no teleprompter like the president, but as soon as he got done speaking and everybody left the chamber of the House, I realized they had just deployed a weapon of mass distraction and that nobody was paying attention. And there were rumors this Senate bill was going to come over and fully fund all the president's illegal amnesty. So I sat on the floor. I didn't go to lunch. I waited there. When the bill came over, there were none of my allies on the floor. They asked for unanimous consent to suspend the reading of the bill, and that always passes, and nobody's ever read a bill in Congress. I objected for the first time in years, and so the clerk had to read the bill. She had to read the DHS bill, and it shocked everybody, but it gave people time. They looked up on their television monitors in their office and said, what's going on? They're reading the bill. Why are they reading the bill? Well, because Massie objected, and so
good for you.
That gave them time to get there, and I made a motion to table that garnered 140 Republicans, a majority of the conference, but the Democrats and some of the Republicans overrode that motion to table. Then we had a debate, and the vote was on the Senate bill that funded all the president's illegal amnesty, and it passed. 75 Republicans joined all of Nancy Pelosi's
partnership with the Democrats. We've got just time for this one. We got the call back. Charles, welcome to the Joe Miller Show. Do you have a question for the congressman?
I do have a question. First, let me say thank you, Joe. What a wonderful show. You got conservative voice up here in Alaska.
Just have a minute left, Charles, so make it quick.
Thank you, Congressman Massie, for coming on the show. You are correct. You had stated that you're waiting for more conservatives to hit D.C. to join the fight, and it could have ramifications for the rest of our country. Why are conservatives in D.C. not getting involved in the primaries like we see the Karl Roves and the general GOP establishment? They come in and they throw their millions of dollars behind the establishment guys, while when we have true patriots and conservatives running in the primaries, we get no help. What can we do to change that? That's my question.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate it.
It is a shame. Some of these GOP establishment groups are throwing lots of money at these races, but we have the grassroots on our side, and we are winning. We picked up a lot of seats. We got 24 votes against Boehner this time. 2 years ago, we only had 9 votes against Boehner. So you all are making a difference. Don't give up. A lot of great groups like Campaign for Liberty, Freedom Works, Club for Growth. We've got some good groups on our side.
Got to wrap it up, Congressman Massie. I sure appreciate your generosity with your time. Thank you for informing us about what's going on in D.C. Keep up the fight. Our prayers and support will stay with you. Stay with us. The Joe Miller Show, back next hour.